Hello and welcome to our group presentation on the problem with John Stuart Mill by Alexa, Alle, Nyla, and Niko. Our thesis is basically that even though he has a sound following, however, his focus on the individuals historically harm other people and their harm cannot be measured, and the focus on the individual rejects any work of a building society, a society that can have a common goal or a religious belief that points them towards greater pleasures. We'll start off with Alexa on the historical impacts of people.
Historically, from J.S. Mill's point of freedom, people have felt happy from hurting people in the past for their personal gain, but not just for their personal gain, they were also trying to help others in the process. For example, in the past, Hitler thought that killing Jews was for his benefit and the benefit of others. In his eyes, he viewed this as the right thing to do, and while helping himself, he was also helping others. He did not view this as slavery because other people were happy and benefited off of this, which means that he doesn't see it as a greater harm to others. While performing these actions that we now view as wrong, he is pleasing himself, which means he is gaining happiness. Hitler also thinks that he is leading other people to happiness, which means there is an absence of pain through him and among other people. He thought that this was all justified, and in his eyes, he was not doing greater harm to other people. This means that he did not view the greater harm exception at all, meaning he thought that he was right, when clearly he was wrong. While Hitler was obviously not thinking about the Jews that he was harming, he was thinking about himself. He was harming others for his personal gain, but subconsciously he was also harming them for the benefit of the community. Which brings us to Allie's point about the harm that is produced upon others.
In John Stuart Mill's perspective on freedom, harm is a very large part in his theory. He says that the limit on freedom is where an individual's actions can put someone else at harm. So you're free unless whatever makes you happy can cause someone else harm on purpose, like the basis of your happiness is someone else's pain and suffering. The only problem is harm is not definable because harm is different for everyone. Someone else's harm can be another person's pleasure and happiness. And harm is not a set in stone concept, like I just said. One person can find something very harmful while another doesn't, and everyone has their own ideas of what harm is because everyone has a different level of sensitivity. There's spiritual, physical, psychological, moral, spiritual. There's a bunch of different types of harm. And J.S. Mill kind of uses it as if there's one set in stone definition of harm. You can't really determine the cost and benefit of J.S. Mill's argument. Therefore, his argument is kind of ineffective in a way. You can't really determine the cost and benefit between in his argument, which is why it's ineffective, but you can't tell because someone can say that they feel happy from hurting someone, and that would go completely against his theory. Freedom by Nigel Warburton, he summarizes Mill's perspective on harm and stuff. So it says, for Mill, if you take offense at something, it doesn't mean you've been harmed. But he also says, if you get physically injured as a result of risky activity, that doesn't amount to harm. Kind of like if you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. So you're not technically being harmed because you brought it upon yourself. But this brings the question, does Mill want us as a society to only define harm as physical? Because there's still psychological harm, spiritual harm, moral harm. And what about his perspective on harm caused by risky activity? Because he says that physical harm is, he kind of like says that physical harm is one of the only types of harm. He doesn't say that, but like he only really focuses on physical harm when he's talking about harm. But then he rules out a type of physical harm as harm.
Thank you, Allie. My argument is the society argument. Even though society takes away certain happinesses like money or ability to do things, the payoff and the benefit of a society is shown through its benefits towards others. Also, John Mill's argument requires a civilized society, which is not possible without certain rules and limitations. So it's kind of like a cost-benefit. Taxes are an example of this. No one likes to pay taxes. However, the happiest countries in the world have the highest tax rates. That was proven by an article in CNN. Basically, the taxes grant societal benefits, which push away pain. So even though they're taking our money, we're getting greater things in return as a community. A civilized society, as stated in the chapter book 3, says that an adult human has to live in a civilized society for John Mill's argument to work. However, there's two questions, and it's that are rules required to keep this society civilized, and how do we trust adults? The thing is that we cannot. We need rules that societies uphold to stop people from acting uncivilized and to make societies these great places where we can trust people to do other things. And some of those rules may require taking away happinesses from people, even though that kind of goes against John Stuart Mill's argument. And also, society brings another source of happiness. A sense of community is proven to be a great sense of happiness and is a larger benefit than just those individual pleasures. Communities can bring opportunities of other forms of happiness. For an example, religion. Religion is another form of happiness that Nyla will talk about now.
I'm doing the religious argument on John S. Mill's theory on freedom, which is freedom is doing what you think will make you happy. And I think there are some flaws to this theory, such as there's no such thing as true happiness, and this is because once we get what we want, we will still want something more. An example of this would be on Christmas. So if you really wanted a phone on Christmas and you got that phone, you'd feel like you'd be happy for a little while, but then after a while you want something more. Let's say a PS5 came out and you really wanted that PS5. You got it, but again, you still want something more. And happiness shouldn't be temporary. Instead, pleasure is temporary, and happiness should be everlasting. So, a statement that I think supports my claim is Abdul Rahman III's claim, which is, even when our material needs and biological needs are satisfied, a state of sustained happiness will remain a theoretical and elusive goal. He is saying what my claim is saying, which is basically you'll never be happy because you'll never be satisfied. And there was also a phrase by a Brazilian poet, I think his name was pronounced Vinicius de Moraes states, which is like a feather in the air, it flies but not for very long. Which means you'll be satisfied for a moment but soon be unsatisfied again. So my counter argument against this claim was John S. Mill puts at the end of his claim, what you think will make you happy. And when he puts the word think in his statement, he's not necessarily saying do what makes you happy or true happiness. And he is not saying that there is true happiness. He is saying do what you think is best for you and will give you happiness without anyone limiting you and or yourself limiting yourself in any way. So basically, the counter argument summed up, even if you are happy, you aren't because you always wish for more. Everything on earth is pleasure, so you may think that you are free because you think you are happy, but you will never get what you want and will always wish for something better. What you want isn't always right either. Human nature is flawed, and a society's choice is better than an individual's choice.
Thank you, Nyla. It is true that earthly possessions do not bring us forms of happiness. However, John Stuart Mill would say that the individual is at the center of our personal freedoms and our desires. We know what is best. Historically, people have also acted kind, even though our historical argument that Alexa brought up says that people act in harmful ways. And a society that throws its rules can harm people, so societies have historically hurt people with their rules that stop them from indulging in certain pleasures. However, our rebuttal is that society and religion provide more profound ways of happiness, so the trade-off with those rules that can somewhat harm people are worth it when you're talking about a general overall happiness. As John Stuart Mill says, it doesn't really matter about the way you get there, it just matters about the end happiness. Also, individuals cannot be trusted to make fair judgment. So John Stuart Mill says that we can trust adults to do what they think is best and not harm others, but who's going to enforce that rather than society? Going over to Nyla for the importance of what we're saying today.
So why is how we perceive freedom important? So freedom impacts our choice, but also society's choice can be better than the individual choices because society works better to find solutions to a better and happier world based off of our past or history. Religion can also teach us that needs are brought by a higher power, and also that we shouldn't strive for self-pleasures and we shouldn't strive for individual happiness. Instead, we should look for a solution where not just the individual feels happy.